Thank you so much, Melina, and good afternoon, everybody. Before I start, a few thank yous. Thank you above all to Dr. Joseph Haldane and Melina and the team for the invitation to this IAFOR conference. It's a real honor to be here and to speak to you. It's great to be here in SOAS, so thank you to SOAS for hosting us, and also because I think we are involved in partner organizations of the IAFOR conference. Welcome to UCL, University College London, where I've been for very many years. So I've got some thoughts to share with you about the role of play in the university. It should last about 25 minutes, and I hope that afterwards we can have something of a discussion, particularly if I finish any earlier. Do bear in mind that, I don't know you and you don't know me, and it's quite hard to pitch, right? Quite hard to have a sense of the right way to organize these thoughts that I've been having for quite a long time, and many of which are in the book that I shall shamelessly plug in a moment. But I want us to think about the role of play and the university, because this is a conference about education, the idea of the university as a play space. But first of all, I'm going to start with a slightly more serious tone, and I want us to watch, unfortunately, a few seconds of J.D. Vance, now Vice President of the US, speaking at the National Conservatism Conference in 2021.
So much of what we want to accomplish, so much of what we want to do in this movement in this country, I think are fundamentally dependent on going through a set of very hostile institutions, specifically the universities, which control the knowledge in our society, which control what we call truth and what we call falsity, that provides research that gives credibility to some of the most ridiculous ideas that exist in our country. And so I'm excited to close this conference with this particular set of remarks, because I think if any of us want to do the things that we want to do for our country and for the people who live in it, we have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country.
Okay. So some strong words from J.D. Vance, and don't worry, I know the audio was quite difficult to hear. I will come back to his words in a moment. I will repeat them for you in case you didn't get them the first time. But essentially, J.D. Vance is calling for an attack on the universities as a necessary part of the right-wing project that now we're seeing being put into action in the second Trump presidency. There is no doubt that what J.D. Vance calls for in 2021 is being put in practice today in 2025. We can see this in the United States. I shan't go into detail, but the attacks on Columbia, the attacks on Harvard, what's happening in Florida, the institutions where, in fact, much of this was trialed under DeSantis. This is a war against elite institutions, academic institutions. It's more than a culture war. It's a war on culture. Beyond the United States, we actually see this in the United Kingdom too. We have this populist, anti-elite, anti-university rhetoric that first came out really around the Brexit campaign. One can think of Michael Gove's famous statement that this country has had enough of experts. And where do you find experts? Where is expertise developed and passed on? In universities. And this continues in the role of the Office for Students, incidentally, and the attacks on universities that in some ways come through there. But even in the sort of left-wing populism that we're seeing strains of in Starmer's government with the influence of Maurice Glassman and the Blue Labour faction, who likewise view universities as some sort of dangerous elite bastion. So Dan Carden MP, who's a member of this Blue Labour grouping, has said, I would close half the universities, right? He said that just a month or so. And I get the impression we're a very international audience today. Perhaps one could think of attacks on universities in other parts of the world, in Hungary, for example, and you may be able to think of similar examples that chime with this sort of this line of not just rhetorical attack, but actually policy attack. It's a matter of funding, it's a matter of direct intervention, and so on. So the questions I think I want to talk about, I want to talk about this at great length, are what are the terms of the attacks? In what ways are these attacks being phrased? And how should we in the university respond to them? And I want to look, not least because we couldn't hear properly, but at what J.D. Vance had to say. Interestingly, of all people to be quoting, he was actually quoting the disgraced President Richard Nixon, who said, never forget that the press is the enemy, the establishment is the enemy, the professors are the enemy. But Vance calls universities hostile institutions. But then he moves into a rhetorical stratagem that has two contradictory parts. On the one hand, he says universities are in control. Right? Universities are in control. They control the knowledge in our society, which control what we call truth and what we call falsity. So these are serious, powerful institutions, hostile institutions. But on the other hand, he says something that's interesting and actually contradicts this. Universities are an institution that, and I quote, gives credibility to some of the most ridiculous ideas in our country. So universities are both control of truth and falsity, and they are the source of ridiculous ideas, something that is nothing to do with truth and falsity. We have this double and contradictory charge. Universities are something serious, and universities are something laughable. And it's my contention that we see this throughout this populist anti-university rhetoric. On the one hand, universities are cast as something serious, the establishment, elite bubbles acting against the people's interest, a danger to the moral, intellectual health of the young, a danger to the very fabric of the nation. And here we have some newspaper headlines. The Daily Mail is always the best source of these. The Remainer universities, right, speaking against the will of the people, or universities peddling woke poison to students, literally poisoning the minds of the young. And on the other hand, universities are portrayed as trivial and often ridiculous. In these elitist bubbles, we're seen to be cut off from real life. We're just messing around. We fret absurdly, apparently, about ridiculous things like pronouns and safe spaces. We peddle Mickey Mouse degrees, right? We're trivial, we're ridiculous. So, which is it going to be? Are universities something serious? Or are we a bit of a joke? Right? Which will it be? It's a very clever double rhetorical strategy, by the way, that this course develops. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? And generally, universities, academics, scholars, all of us, perhaps in our daily conversation when we come across these attacks, we respond by emphasizing our significance and our seriousness. We talk about the impact we have, the value we bring. We say, no, we're serious institutions with a serious role. But today I want to suggest that there is value in recognizing something in the truth of that second attack, that there is something ludicrous, and from the same root, ludic, i.e. playful, about universities, and that one way of responding is to emphasize the role of the university as a place of play. And after all, there's something in it. We are both serious and ridiculous, or serious and playful. Think of the meaning of the word academic, right? That's an academic question. What does that mean? On the one hand, an academic question is something that scholars take very seriously and go into libraries or do experiments to find the answers to. On the other hand, an academic question is something that doesn't matter. Yeah, that's just an academic question. At that point, it's merely academic. Academic has this double meaning. Important and serious, trivial, irrelevant, unserious, on the other hand. I might also point to you that trivial, the word meaning unimportant, unserious, comes from the Latin trivium, which are the three subjects of the medieval curriculum, i.e. were the three most important things. So trivial also actually has that double meaning. There is a lot that is playful and ridiculous about what we do in universities. Think of the dressing up that we do, right? In scholarly gowns or in rag costumes, students dressing up to raise money for charity. Think of the ridiculous and impenetrable language that we use, whether it's the signs of mathematics that don't really, do they mean anything to anybody? Or Latin verse, or the jargon and terminology that all of our disciplines develop. We can think of the cliche of the abstract, what's he called? The distracted scientist, the absent-minded professor, right? And here we are in our silly ivory towers, separate off from, right, the real serious business of life. There is indeed a lot about the university that is a form of play. And here's a wonderful quotation from Donna Tartt's very successful novel, The Secret History, about an elite liberal arts college in the Northeast United States, where students get up to all sorts of bad things in the end. But the students have a professor of Greek called Julian, with whom they study, this small band of students. And he says, and we have this quotation, "Work," he said to me once, astonished, when I referred to our classroom activities as such. "Do you really think that what we do is work? What else should I call it? I should call it the most glorious kind of play." And I think we've all experienced that with our students, the privilege that we have not to work, but to be engaged in the most glorious sort of play. Now, in my book that I'm now shamelessly plugging, I spend the first 50,000 words, exploring this element of play and the ridiculousness that is there in what it means to be in academia, particularly in the humanities. So I speak as a literature scholar and a scholar of ideas. So I'll give you a few snapshots. You'll have to read the book to find out more. I tell the story of the most ludicrous, ridiculous, over-the-top presentation I ever experienced, given by a Slovene art theorist, where she suggested that we need to do this art performance called porno vandalism, that I shan't tell you about now, as a response to the migrant crisis. And at the same time, I tell the serious story of the tragic fate of a group of Inuit who were taken from their home in Labrador to Europe to be displayed in a human zoo, and who died in Europe of smallpox because the person who took them had failed to have them vaccinated. I tell the story of the serious thing that underlay her ridiculous, playful talk, right? I talk about the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, right, who refused to be characterized as either fully playful or either fully serious. But I don't look at his philosophy. I look at him as a cricket player, here he is in the bottom, as an eater of crisps and a teller of jokes. And I use this portrait of Derrida to show that maybe we could own up more readily to the sort of ludic pleasures that underlie even the serious discipline of philosophy. Or to take a third example, following the fantastic, she's one of the best people writing about literature today, Rita Felsky, I look at critical writing in the humanities. This is where humanities scholars look at novels, for example, and reveal that behind them there's the serious business of patriarchy or imperialism or class domination. And I argue that even when critics think they're doing this very serious thing, detecting structures of oppression in 19th century novels, actually they're enjoying the detective game of looking at the literary text with a lens as if they were Sherlock Holmes to try and find clues and then apportioning blame. Who's the villain? Is it patriarchy? Is it empire? Is it the bourgeoisie? Right? And in the book, and I've stopped now talking about the book, I don't argue against playfulness in what we do in academia. It may seem that I'm satirizing, and there is an element of satire. But I think we should recognize, own up to, and actually own this playfulness more, that we should play more fully in order to be more serious. That's the argument that I make there, and I try and show in what I do what is a very playful book. Today, I won't talk any more about that, but I want to take a slightly different, maybe more serious approach to the same question. So let's start from the beginning. We're talking about the university. The university has a range of functions. What do we think they might be? Well, I'm not going to get you into groups and discuss and then come back. But if we were doing a class, obviously that's what I would. Okay, so let's have some functions of the university. Well, the first one, I'm from UCL. UCL was founded in 1826 by Jeremy Bentham to provide useful knowledge, to use his words, chrestomathic education, knowledge for the public good, technological advances, medical discoveries, and so on. So the university might be for that. It might be to contribute to the economy, to the improvement of society, It might be to help societies understand themselves and other societies when we learn about other parts of the world and other languages and other experiences. It might be to provide students with skills and employment prospects. Yeah? It might be a means of perpetuation of various cycles of social and cultural capital, or perhaps, if we're more idealistic, of social mobility. Right? But these are possible functions of the university, and they are all serious things. But in addition, I'm suggesting the function of the university is to be the space that society sets apart for play, serious play. So, what is a space of play or game? To look at this, I want to refer us to Johan Huizinga, the Dutch cultural historian who writes this book, Homo Ludens, right, Playing Man, in 1938. And it's an investigation of the function of play in culture. Extraordinary. I strongly recommend it. It can't really be pigeonholed. It's written under the shadow of Nazism. Incidentally, he's aware that the Netherlands are likely to be invaded. Really incredible account of the anthropological social function of play in relation to war and religion and all sorts of things. But Huizinga's idea of play is that, or play or a game, is a special space, right? And a special time that is marked out. And he sees the analogy, by the way, between play and the religious. We think of sacred spaces and sacred times. It's a similar function. Within this space, separate from everyday life, so profane life, certain restrictions apply and certain freedoms are granted. And he calls this space as being marked out by a magic circle, right? A magic circle of play or game. Within the magic circle, rules hold and risks can be taken. We can engage in all sorts of unusual forms of behavior, perhaps ones that involve risk. But outside that space and outside that time, so off the pitch, when the whistle has gone, nothing really matters because we've returned to the everyday, right? And to give an example of this, I'm going to show you, because I suspect that not all of you are familiar with this particular game, 1 minute, 13 seconds of rugby. It's a match played in 1973 with the Barbarians against New Zealand. Most of the Barbarian team, it's an invitational team, it's a special team, are from the Welsh team, which is the team that I support. And we'll just watch this.
5. Number 2, John Pullen, England's captain. The hooker.
That's the Barbarians. I'm back.
McBride trying to get. Wilkinson going. Williams again. Everyone with him.
That would be illegal today.
Sid going. Very little support. Good tackle by Slattery of Ireland. Almost on the halfway line. Kirkpatrick to Williams. This is great stuff. Phil Bennett covering. Chased by Alistair Scone. Brilliant. Oh, that's brilliant. John Williams. Brian Williams. Pulling. John Dawes. Great dummy. David. Tom David. The halfway line. Brilliant by Quinnell. This is Gareth Edwards. A dramatic start. What a score.
Gareth Edwards, arguably one of the greatest players of all time. Welsh, number 9, scrum half. Oh, sorry, we could watch it again. So, rugby, right? Defined by a magic circle. The lines that demarcate the pitch, and the 80 minutes that are determined by the whistle of the referee, space and time. Within this circle, certain things are allowed that aren't allowed in everyday life. You've seen people violently assault each other, tackle them with force to the ground. And within this circle, certain things are forbidden that are not forbidden in everyday life. So you might have noticed you have to pass the ball backwards. You may not pass the ball forwards. within the circle of rugby, risks are taken. You can see the incredible risks are taken and freedoms are explored. Look at the amazing way, right? Is it Phil Bennett does that, swerves and sidesteps and finds freedom within restrictions. At the end of the day, New Zealand and the barbarians have bashed each other to bits. The whistle goes, they shake hands, nothing really matters, okay? It's just a game. Alongside its serious functions, the university is a play space defined by a magic circle. We might want to think of, for example, Oxford and Cambridge colleges that are separate off from the town. They have their quads and their courtyards. And we'll talk about the time in a moment. University also has a special time, not for us so much as academics, for us students. It's a special time in life. And this special space and this special time has its freedoms and its rules. In university, we play. We could go into much more about this, but we experiment with dangerous chemicals. We blow things up, right? But we do so under safe conditions with certain rules. We use models in economics or role play or building scenarios in social sciences, but we do so using academic evidence and methods, right? We don't do so irresponsibly. There are rules to when which we set up those play events. In my sort of discipline, in literature, in politics and history, we explore dangerous ideas. We read, difficult writers and people we disagree with. We try and explore perspectives that are alien to us. We read, Dostoevsky, that's about someone who kills an old woman. We try to understand what was going on in his head through Dostoevsky's writing. But we do so responsibly and critically and with a sense of ethical limits. So we play, we take risks, but we do so on the bounded territory of the university with a sense of rules and fairness to participants. And here, we might think about safe spaces. I just dropped this in here, but I think it's quite interesting. On the right, these critics I mentioned at the beginning, there are often criticisms made of the universities as allowing safe spaces to exist, places where students, maybe of certain characteristics, are shielded from things that might trigger them or might cause them discomfort. And yes, of course, the world is dangerous. And it's more or less dangerous to different people in different ways, depending on our characteristics, right? If you're privileged in the vectors as a white middle-aged man that I am, and I encounter the world, I have perhaps fewer dangers to people of other characteristics. But we must think about what safe spaces and safety means. Safety can be safety from dangers, threats, harms, but it can also be safety to. The safety to be able to do something, to experiment, to be wrong, to do difficult things. And a true safe space, to my mind, is one that holds together both those elements, safety from and safety to. Ideally, and it isn't always the case, and there's a much longer discussion here about equalities within the university that I'm afraid I'm leaving out for the time being, but maybe we can pick up in discussion. The university is the safe space for society as a whole. It's a space in which society is safe from real life demands, a space within which society is safe for dream, for fantasy, for experiment. But again, safe spaces and play need rules that allow them to come into being and within which their freedoms are possible. And I just want to suggest, and this is the big UCL campaign being led by our provost, but it isn't just propaganda, I think I agree with it. The primary rule and freedom of the university has to be diversity of views and opinions, the freedom and the responsibility that goes within that to disagree with others, to do so in a way that is respectful, that recognizes rules and safeties and so on. We need the freedom, this is part of disagreeing well, to point out the flaws in an experiment and to propose new experiments. We need the freedom to question models and their assumptions, to explore the diversity of actors in role play, to imagine alternative scenarios about the future. We need the freedom to take seriously uncomfortable ideas and consider all sorts of interpretations, even ones that alien us to us. Here I'm sort of mangling Hans-Georg Gadamer, the German philosopher, but I'm suggesting that, paraphrasing him, to say that real academic dialogue is going into a conversation open to the possibility that your opponent might be right and you might be wrong. If we don't have the freedom to play like this, then the space of the university is not one of play, but of indoctrination and ritual. Arguably, ritual is a game where there's no longer anything new in it, one that repeats itself over and over again, like that bit at the beginning of a video game in an arcade before you put the 50 pence in, right? That's ritual. It's a reference in the 1980s. I'm sorry, not many of you will get that. The play of the university, separate from society, has a vital and serious function for society. The magic circle of the university allows it to be a space where we can give ourselves the freedom to experiment, to imagine how society could be different, better, more effective, fairer, more just. These are freedoms that other spaces in society, like politics, finance, economics, the law, do not have. This is our wonderful responsibility, serious play. I'm about to finish, but I want to bring this to perhaps the lives of our students and describe what I'm going to call two narratives of being a student, two stories that students can tell about their experience. The first narrative is a linear narrative of seriousness. Students go to university, the best ones they can get, having accumulated points at school, to get skills and qualifications the best they can in order to lead them on to a more rewarding economically or socially life after university. So here again, university is a sort of stepping stone. It's a square on the endless board. Well, it does end. It ends in death, but we ought not to tell them that. A square on the endless board of the competitive game of life. This is like a video game where you go up different levels, accumulating badges and skills and so on. And these sort of games aren't much fun. They're nothing like Gareth Edwards and the Barbarians against New Zealand in 1973. Unfortunately, this is the dominant narrative that has taken over student life, right? You know, and maybe it contrasts to, or certainly contrasts to my experience with students. Students now have no shots to nothing, to use an expression from snooker. Everything is assessed. They're under extraordinary pressure. There are no risks that they can take because every roll of the dice counts. And if you come in with lots of counters because you're privileged, yes, you can afford to do a little bit more. But if you come in with few chips in front of you because you come from a less privileged position, you've got everything to lose and nothing to win. So you have to play seriously this dreadful stepping stone game of life or video game arcade or whatever it is. It's a form of play that no longer looks much like play. It looks like work. Now, the second narrative of being a student is that of university as a play space, a holiday from seriousness. And by the way, holidays that I also write in my book are very like games. They're separate from everyday life. We can do things we don't normally do in our normal life. Holidays are like play. Yeah? Here, university is not a stepping stone, but a liminal space. And here I'm referring to anthropological theories of liminal experiences, thresholds, initiation rites, rites of passage, special places in between where strange rules apply, strange things happen. The university can be this. It can be a liminal space between the unfreedom of childhood, where we have to obey our parents and our teachers, and the unfreedom of adulthood and the world of work and responsibility, where we have to obey economic and social necessity. In between is this incredible space, a magic circle that can be a time of freedom, of experiment, and in fact transformation, because real play transforms us. It's a place where we open ourselves to explore new experiences, ideas, cultures, identities, ways of seeing the world, a place where it's a time and place where we can work out, without it mattering too much, right? Because it's just a game, who we are, what our values are, how we want to fit into the world. That's what university can be. That's a second narrative. Now, the great thing, actually, about the special time of university is that students don't really have to choose between the two narratives. They can coexist, right? University can be both serious and play, serious play. By learning to play and experiment by learning to disagree well, students prepare themselves to be a better part of a larger world, complex, plural, diverse, and full of difference. And in order to be more serious as academics and teachers, we, I think, should be encouraging more risks taken in safety, more freedom, more experiment, and more play. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have about 8 minutes for questions.
Did I go on?
That's fine. Anybody wants to ask a question?
Thank you. It was very interesting. I come from Switzerland. We don't play rugby. We play football. And I have a little provocative question, but positive, to make a link with the conference from this morning about AI and society. And I would like to know, what do you mean about, if you remember the last World Cup of football, I don't remember the name of the players, but a players shoots a goal. It was goal. The crowd was shooting of joy, exuberant, jubilate, and the referee, l'arbitre, said, "Stop, we need to check on the camera because it was maybe offside." Mm-hmm. And the question is, the line was here and the AI system could be very exact. If the players had a bigger foot, maybe a bigger, it could be offside or not. And my question is, what do you mean with this AI implication in our society with such emotions moment, full of emotion? Because if you know Brunner, we need to play, we need to investigate with our brain, our heart, and our hand, to make it physically, to make it cognitively and emotionally. So what do you mean of this AI implication in our society today?
That's a fantastic question, and one I really haven't thought about very much. So I guess one of the things, I mean, AI is a form of playfulness, right? It's a form of creation that has spilled out into the real. So all of a sudden, these fictions with deep fakes and, I don't know, post-truths and so on, we can't tell the difference between what's AI generated and what isn't. And I think it's a tremendous but dangerous play space that has almost spilled out of the magic circle of game and spilled over into our experience of everyday life. That's one observation. I'm not going to be able to answer this at all. I am watching the Women's European Cup in Switzerland at the moment, enjoying that. England beat France yesterday. But the other thing about AI in terms of the university is, of course, AI allows students to cheat, right? And games predicate an idea that, yes, you can push the rules close to the line, you can try and make the rules stretch, but they're predicated on the idea that we all play by the rules. We all listen to the arbitre or the referee or whatever it is. And I think AI really disrupting some of the playfulness of the university because they're bringing in this possibility of cheating that won't just be the exception, but is the rule. Those would just be my first thoughts, but very interesting. I'll think more about that.
Yes, I liked how you were juxtaposing the ridiculous and with the serious. But I was just thinking that you said a university is a place for, it's a space and place for meaning making. But the question is for whom? And I'm just thinking about J.D. Vance conversation and his discussion. And I'm wondering if it is that we need to have accessible information to bridge the gap between the within the university and the without. So maybe what we need to do in all of the research that we're doing, every time we do research and we publish a paper, it needs to be unpacked so it's accessible, so the average man in the street could understand what's happening within the university. So I think that's a big issue. I know where I am at the University of the West Indies is one of the things that we're trying to figure out how we can have reach within society, within our society, and it's about how we are going to unpack this information to make it accessible. So I'm just speaking.
Yeah, that's a really, really important question and area that you raise. So one of the things that I look at in the book is, yes, the university has its ridiculousness, and partly because it's speaking amongst itself, this sort of language that nobody understands, that could be gobbledygook, right? Could be made up. And how can we be more serious, right? How can we engage more? How can we break out of that play and become more serious? And my suggestion is that one way is to take that play further, almost to but I do think it's if you take the diagnosis that there's something separate that has its own arcane rituals and perhaps ridiculous to it, how do we step outside the magic circle? And I'm not always convinced that insisting that we're terribly serious is the way to do it. We're impact and we're engaging and so on. I think maybe we might bring some of that playfulness that we enjoy. It's one of the privileges we have within university, and allow that to spill over. But it's a really, really important and interesting area that you've raised there. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your teaching, your talk. It's really validated some of my beliefs about play. Like I'd work with young children, and I find that when you use play in working with children, they actually retain a lot of knowledge because they're happy. When we play, in fact, thinking of the word play, there's already an excitement. So incorporating play and seriousness in the university system, I think that will help students learn more. It will also help students reduce stress as well. So combining the seriousness of work, in quote, and the unseriousness of play, I think that will bring a lot of balance and actually help with even mental health issues.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. And I don't have experience in primary education. I was talking to Marcelo just beforehand about his work coming out of that. I think we as adults need to obviously retain that and rediscover that. I don't know if any of you have ever met a serious German professor of history or something. They're incredibly serious, and they're talking to you as if they're the most important person in the world. But actually what they're doing is something incredibly playful. Sometimes I have a week or so in a year where I sit in the garden, I read French novels. And I do that for a whole week. And then I think, gosh, I've worked really hard for 2 weeks reading French novels in the garden. I think we should be more honest, right, about the fact that what we do is an immense privilege because it's play. But that doesn't mean it's not serious, because that play that we do, as in your example with primary school children, has a transformative impact on us, our students, and perhaps even on the world. Yeah.
Okay, we have run out of time. Please join me in thanking Professor Beasley-Murray.
Thank you very much. Thank you.